welcome once again to Mission Community Church. Glad that you are here. And I know I've enjoyed the last couple of weeks off, vacationing with family in North Carolina, and very appreciative of Pastor Josh Kranz and Pastor Tim Deering to filling in the pulpit the last 2 weeks. I hope you've been encouraged and challenged by their bringing of the word and them sharing what God has laid on their hearts. So I really appreciate those two guys and love the relationships that we're building with them and just their heart for God. And so I hope you enjoyed them and were challenged by their message. If you're new with us today, we've been in a summer series entitled Playlist, in which we're looking at the book of Psalms, trying to spend some time not just learning more about God or trying to explain God, which that does happen in the Psalms, but in a way trying to experience God in a new way. That when you look throughout the entire book of Psalms, that these are songs that can really relate to any situation, any season of life that you may find yourself in. That, in the great words of the theologian Alan Green, that whether good times and bad, happy or sad, that there is a song that will speak to and resonate with you no matter the season that you're in. Now, a little pet peeve of mine, and I've heard this over the last several weeks, and we just need to set the record straight. So when we talk about the book of Psalms, we are talking about 150 individual psalms or songs that make up the book of Psalms. But when we talk about an individual psalm like Psalm 139, it's not Psalms 139, it is Psalm 139. Just like you wouldn't say songs 139. So if you come up to me and you start asking me questions about Psalms 51 and Psalms 23, I'm just going to dismiss you right there on the spot and teach you. Again, it is the book of Psalms, and which is made up of 150 different individual songs. Now, King David, what I would suggest is the greatest musician to ever live, King D. He wrote about 50% of the book of Psalms, and then you have Moses that contributed some songs, and the sons of Korah that you might see in some of the headers of these psalms and others. But King David is certainly the major writer of this book. And so as we've looked through these songs, again, these are songs that can speak to where we are in whatever season of life we find ourselves, that they really do make up the playlist of life. And of all the psalms, if you were to take a poll, I would imagine that most people would probably agree with or suggest that Psalm 23 is probably the most popular psalm. Walk through the valley of the shadow of death, or fear no evil. Like, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, a lot of people know that particular psalm. Perhaps second to that song is Psalm 139 that we will look at today. Now, when I say Psalm 139, you may not think exactly of what that psalm says, but as I start to unpack it here this morning, I think you'll be familiar with some of the language and the verses that you'll hear. Now, I have to say that typically I usually speak from the English Standard Version of the Bible, the ESV. The English Standard Version is a literal translation of the Bible. But this morning I'm going to be talking through with the New Living Translation. And the New Living Translation is referred to as a dynamic equivalency translation, where it's trying to capture the heart and the emotions behind the words from the original manuscripts. And so if it looks a little different, that's why I'm looking at the New Living Translation today. So King David starts off in Psalm 139, verse 1. He says this. He says, "O Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I am far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I am going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand." Now let me try to set the context of what's happening here, or at least try to illustrate what David is trying to tease out. I don't know about you, but there's a couple different situations or environments that I can put myself in, which helps me to just be blown away by the greatness and the majesty of God. So if I am ever like in some sort of scenic type of a place, whether it's on mountaintops looking over a mountain range and valleys, or if I'm at, a lakeside just taking in the beauty of a lake, or even sitting on the shores of a beach just looking out at the vastness of the ocean, that helps me begin to think about God and how he created this beautiful creation, and just how big and vast this creation is, that it begins to short circuit my brain. That when I'm driving in my car and I turn off the radio and I just am in the quietness of my car as I'm driving from point A to point B, I can find myself in these places where I can quickly, I've learned how to really short circuit myself. And I like being in that place when I'm thinking about God, meditating on God, and what that helps me to do is take the focus off of myself and just focus on the greatness and the goodness of our Creator God. Now, this is kind of what David is doing here. So he starts off, he's saying, you've examined my heart, you know everything about me, you know when I sit down and stand up, you know my thoughts even when I'm far away, you see when I travel or when I rest, everything I do is aware to you. You know when I am going to say something, even before it's on my lips, that David is getting to a theological term that's known as God's omniscience, that God knows everything. And he knows everything about you, individually. And that when I begin to think about that on our world today, there's some 7-8 billion people on this planet, that God, being omniscient, knows everything about everyone. He knows everything about me. He knows everything about you. He knows everything about every single person on this planet. That begins to blow my mind. That he has given his undivided attention to every single individual here on earth. And David is contemplating this. He's thinking about this. He's writing the lyrics of this song. He says, when I sit down or stand up, you see me when I travel and when I rest at home, that God knows all of my works, the things that I do. That you know my thoughts even when I am far away. You know my wonders. You know the things that go on in my head. You know the complexities and the mysteries and the wonders that I think about when you are even far away from me. That God, you even know my words. That before I speak something, when that word is on the tip of my tongue, you know what I'm about to say. Now it's interesting because God, he is omniscient. He knows everything. He's not learning things as he goes. He's not learning about us as we continue to live our lives. He already knows it all. Now, there's different ways you can look at that. That God is incomprehensible, that he blows your mind, that although you cannot know all there is to know about God, God knows all there is to know about you, that David isn't discouraged in this, he's actually encouraged. There's the two ways that you can look at this is really with great comfort or great condemnation and control. How many of you are familiar with the band The Police back in the early 80s? So back in the early 80s, Sting, he was caught in an extramarital affair that went public, and as a way to escape the general population, he went to the Caribbeans and he wrote the song "Every Breath You Take." Now listen to the lyrics of this song. Every breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. You familiar with it? That every single day, every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you. Now it's interesting because people have long looked at that song in two different lights. That in the early 80s, that was one of the most popular songs that were played at wedding ceremonies. But the whole context behind that song is that Sting is writing about this obsessive, controlling lover that doesn't let him breathe, doesn't let him escape, that when an interviewee asks Sting what does he think about these weddings and these couples playing the song at their weddings, he responds by, good luck. And it's kind of like how we view this Psalm 139. Like, what do you mean, God, that you know my thoughts even when I'm far away? Like, there's times when I don't want God to know my thoughts. Like, what do you mean that you see me when I travel and when I rest at home, that you know everything? Like, there's this tendency that if we're afraid of God and we view God as a judging God, that we look at him as oppressively controlling, instead of what David is looking at here at God as this overwhelmingly comforting God, that he knows everything about me. That if you're only 99.9% known, then you're not fully known. And when we are fully known, there's nothing to fear. There's nothing to be ashamed of. That we're not. There's no fear of being found out. God, you know everything, and it blows my mind, is what David is saying. So he's omniscient. God knows everything. And hopefully you take great comfort in that he knows the struggles you're going through. He knows your ins and outs. He knows the faithfulness that you're trying to live this life by. He knows those things. But then he goes on and says this in verse 7, that it's like, I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around to become night, but even in darkness I cannot hide from you. To you the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you. What David is talking about here in this little section of Psalm 139 is God's omnipresence. So if God's omniscience is that God knows everything, God's omnipresence is that God is everywhere, including with you. That David is saying, okay, if I think about the highest heavens, you're there. If I think about the depths of the earth, you're there. Your spirit is with me. I can't escape you. If I think about the rising sun on the east and how that light is cast all the way to the rest in the farthest oceans, even there you are present with me. And you have to think about what David, or the context in which David is writing this. He's writing this probably from a hillside in Jerusalem when he sees that sunrise in the east. And he sees the Mediterranean Sea to his west, and he's like, I can't flee from you. I can't escape your presence. Anywhere I go, you are with me. And not only that, even in the darkness of life, you are present with me. I remember a couple of years ago, as Colleen and I and the kids were traveling to North Carolina, we were going down Interstate 81, and we decided to stop at one of the caverns there and take the kids in and tour the caverns. And there was a point in that adventure, in that traveling there, that as we're in the deep part of the caverns, they cut out all the lights. And you literally could not see your hand in front of your face. Like, it was the darkest dark I've ever experienced, the blackest black. And there was something about like just the surrounding presence of darkness in that moment. And David is saying, even the darkness, as it envelops me, as it surrounds me, like it's not dark to you. Your presence is overwhelmingly here with me. And here's kind of where my mind starts to go, starts to be blown. I'm not suggesting that this is a theological reality, but this is kind of how I think, to try to purposefully try to short circuit my brain. So when we think about God's omnipresence, that he is everywhere all the time, and as I grew up in the church and I've learned and studied the scriptures, there's this idea that God is outside the bounds of time, that he is Alpha, Omega, he's beginning and end, he has always existed, he is infinite, that there is no beginning and end with God. And so when we talk about God's omnipresence, if God is everywhere present all the time, could it also be true that because God is outside the bounds of time, he is just as present here in this moment as he was a year ago and was present at the beginning of creation? Like, what if all of that is happening at the same time because God is outside the bounds of time? That's where my mind gets blown. Now, I don't know if that's true. That's just kind of what what I think about to help me get to the place where I just stand in awe of who God is, of how great he is. And again, this is what David is doing in Psalm 139. He's just sitting there contemplating, writing down these lyrics and just being blown away by the greatness and the majesty of God. Then he goes on and he says this. So as he gets past kind of creation around him, he starts to focus in on himself. So he says this in verse 13, you made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Some versions say, thank you for making me fearfully and wonderfully made. You may be familiar with that version. That you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, oh God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still there. This is where David is starting to talk about God's omnipotence, that God is all-powerful. So God is omniscient. He knows everything. God is omnipresent. He is everywhere. And God is also omnipotent. He is all-powerful. That he begins to focus on himself, and he realizes that being made in the image and likeness of God, we have God's fingerprints all over us. That David is thinking about his existence, that he is the pinnacle of God's creation. Now think about this for a moment. That you are who you are because one cell from your dad went and chased down another cell from your mom. There's a lot more involved in that, but we're going to keep this PG related today. That one cell from your dad, he outswam about 200 to 300 million other cells in order to meet that one cell with your mom. Each cell's carrying 23 chromosomes, and when they combined, that formed one new human cell containing all the DNA needed to make you who you are today. Like that begins to start to short circuit the brain a little bit. That all of the genetic material needed to form a human being is present in that one cell. That did you know that each cell contains a strand of DNA, and each strand of DNA contains 300 billion base pairs? That if you were begin to stretch out DNA, that one DNA strand in your body would be over 6 feet long. Now, how does something that is 6 feet long contain itself within one cell? Mind blown. And you continue to go down this path of two cells coming together to form a human being. This is what you look like at 3 days old. You are 16 cells. This is on the tip of a safety pin. This is how high magnification picture this is. That 16 cells there, that miracles are happening moment by moment as you are being formed and fashioned in your mother's womb. And that those 16 cells eventually form a human being in which we are made up of about 75 trillion cells. Now, 75 trillion cells, each cell contains a strand of DNA. If you were to stack those DNA lengthwise all the way out as far as they will go, you would have enough DNA strands to travel to the sun and back 4 times. 93 million miles away. How does that exist in this body? Like, that should begin to blow your mind. That just now, 50,000 of your cells just died and were replaced by 50,000 new cells. And just right now, another 50,000 died and were replaced by new cells. That no wonder you're exhausted all the time. You are doing incredible things that every 7 to 10 years, you are basically like a new human being because of the cells that replenish themselves. It reminds me of a quote that one of the ancient church fathers, Augustine, said. He said this. He said, "Men go abroad to wonder at the heights of mountains, at the huge waves of the sea, at the long courses of the rivers, at the vast compass of the ocean, at the circular motions of the stars, but they pass by themselves without even wondering." That you are marked by majesty. Every single cell contains the fingerprints of God. You are the pinnacle of God's creation. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Here you are at just about 13 weeks, beginning to take on human form inside of your mother. And then here you are at 24 weeks. Every organ is fully formed. That the detailed purposes of those organs are beginning to flesh themselves out. Like these miracles are happening every single moment as you're being fashioned and formed within your mother. That if I could just highlight one more miraculous, incredible thing. That somewhere about the 24, 25 week mark when you're inside your mother, that there are 1 million nerve fibers leaving the optic center of your brain, and there are another 1 million nerve fibers leaving your eye, and each of those nerve fibers are going towards each other, in which there is one match, that they are perfectly connected, 1 out of 1 million, a million times over. Like scientists and engineers, they look at the human eye and they look at it with such amazement. That is one of the most technologically advanced organs on our body. That you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And then every day of our existence is recorded in his book. That even before we were born, he jotted that down. How many days we would be here, how we would leave this place. And so I hope that brings comfort for when you have that unsuspecting diagnosis that comes up. When you have that sudden tragedy that comes out of nowhere, or even if you're fortunate enough to make it to old age and we begin to question, why is God taking my father? Why is God taking my grandfather, my grandmother? That each of those days are already marked in the book of life. That he is all powerful. He knows you inside and out. He sees everything. By his word, all of creation was brought into existence. But thoughts of the complexity of our existence ought not terminate on ourselves. Like what we've done with this verse in Psalm 139, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, we tend to make that all about ourselves. And I want to say that yes, you are uniquely complex. You are uniquely valuable. That's why as Christians, we look at passages like this and we say that life begins at conception, that we are pro-life, that this is a human being inside of the mother as that person, as that boy, as that girl is developing, that there is value, just as much value for the human life inside of a mother as there is value in the human life that's in this room. That there's just as much value whether you're white or black, whether you're male or female, that there is equal value and dignity for every single human being on the face of the planet. But the thoughts of the complexity of our existence ought not to terminate on ourselves, as if to think it's all about us. But as we think about just how complex and how unique and how really awesome we are, that ought to roll up into a greater praise and a worship of the one who fearfully and wonderfully made us. That we have purpose, that he's designated plans and events for us to go through. He is a great God. Now listen to this. David continues in verse 19. "Oh God, if only you would destroy the wicked. Get out of my life, you murderers. They blaspheme you. Your enemies misuse your name. Oh Lord, shouldn't I hate those who hate you? Shouldn't I despise those who oppose you? Yes, I hate them with total hatred, for your enemies are my enemies. Where did that come from? So David is here talking about, God's omniscience, God's omnipresence, God's omnipotence, and then all of a sudden he says, kill the enemies. Get at them. Take them out. Your enemies are my enemies, God. As I've thought about this and trying to figure out, David, what's going on, dude? Where'd this come from? I kind of started thinking about my beautiful bride. If you know Colleen, she's, if you spend any time with her, you know that she's one of the sweetest people on the face of the earth, that she is able to talk to anybody, that she's able to make anybody feel welcomed and valued, that she's always looking out for the betterment of other people. She's constantly meeting with women here at the church. She's bringing gifts whenever we go anywhere. I think I've shared this example before, that we just celebrated our middle son's birthday this past week. One of the things that Colleen does for each of our kids on their birthday mornings is she does special breakfast. And what special breakfast is she'll take a theme of whatever's resonating with our child at that time. This week happened to be Minecraft, that she'll completely decorate the dining room table and the dining room with Minecraft stuff. So that when Shane comes downstairs on his birthday morning, it's like a complete overwhelming view of Minecraft, and then there's donuts and junk food and this, that, and the other. Don't judge me, I know that you do it too with your kids. But it makes them feel special. And she's always loving and always caring and always looking out for them. One of the things that we did for Shane for his birthday this past week was we took him to Dave & Buster's. Now, if you know Shane, he loves video games, and so when he walks down the steps into Dave & Buster's at Plymouth Meeting, he's completely overwhelmed by all the arcade and the light games. He's in heaven, I kid you not. And for the last several weeks, we've been seeing these promotionals on TV about how Dave & Buster's is running this deal of unlimited food and unlimited play for $19.99. And so we go and we double check too on the website, and there it is, unlimited food, unlimited play for $19.99. And so we go to Dave & Buster's. We have to eat first. We get seated. The server comes up and we start asking about this unlimited food, unlimited play. But apparently that very morning, the company told all of the stores to remove that menu item, to remove that promotional from their list. Very quickly, my beautiful Barbie wife turned into Mama She-Bear. And she went to the server and said right away, I'll speak to your manager. Now, you gotta know this about Colleen. If you start poking with her kids, watch out. I'm there with popcorn. Just watch. I don't have to say anything. So the manager comes over, and so she just starts grilling the manager. This is on your website currently. I'm pulling it up on my phone. Here it is. Unlimited food, unlimited play for $19.99. It's my son's birthday. We traveled 45 minutes just so he could enjoy Dave & Buster's. She turned into a little bit of a crazy woman, because Dave & Buster's quickly became the enemy of Shane. He wasn't going to get his unlimited play, his unlimited food. Kind of what's happening here with King David. That is, King David is being caught up in God's omniscience. God, I can't even fathom how much you know about me. And as King David is getting caught up about God's omnipresence, anywhere I go, where can I go? And your spirit isn't with me. When he's getting caught up with just how intricately designed he is and how he is fearfully and wonderfully made, as he's meditating on God's omnipotence, how powerful he is, there is this love, there is this devotion, there is this praise that is welling up within inside of David as he's directing that back to God. And then he's seen the enemies of God. And because of his love for God, because of his devotion towards God, the enemies of God becomes David's enemies. I said, God, just take them out. I don't understand that how can someone not view you as infinitely powerful and intensely personal? How can they reject you when they look at how great you are and how good you are? He's almost trying to get God's back. But it's interesting how he wraps up this psalm. Because he's looking at the evil enemies surrounding him, the external enemies around him. And just as there are evil enemies, David changes the focus on the evil inner me that's within him. So he says in verses 23 and 24, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, that is evil in your sight, and lead me along the path of everlasting life." So as Christians, as children of God, yes, we should look out into the world and we should view the evil in the world and we should want to do something about the evil in the world, but it must not stop there. When we are faced with evil, it ought to cause us to reflect back on our own selves, the evil that's within us, and ask God, "Search me. Is there any evil in my life? Is there anything in my life that's offensive to you? Know my heart, test my anxious thoughts, and lead me in the way of everlasting." God is entirely perceptive. He is everywhere present, intricately precise, infinitely powerful, and intensely personal. And because of that, we can fully trust him. We can fully place our faith in him. Let's stand together as we pray.